The lobby of Hailtech looked like a shrine built for people who believed they were untouchable. Polished floors, mirrored walls, statues of past CEOs carved in stone, all honoring one family name, Hale. And right in the center of that cold perfection walked Victoria Hale, the woman who believed the sun rose only to see her succeed. Employees straightened their backs the second she passed, not out of respect, but out of fear. Today was supposed to be her triumph. A major investor was coming in, someone her board said could change the entire future of Hailtech. But Victoria didn't care about investors. She cared about status. And in her world, only certain people deserved a seat at her table. She stepped into the boardroom with a sharp smile, ready to perform her usual routine of dominance. One by one, she shook hands with every board member, offering that polished smile she practiced in the mirror. Then her eyes landed on the final person at the table. A black man in his early 30s, calm posture, tailored suit, eyes that held the kind of peace you only gain after surviving storms. He stood respectfully, ready to introduce himself. Victoria didn't lift her hand. She didn't acknowledge him. She simply turned away and moved on as if he were invisible. For a second, the room froze. A few eyes widened. A few hearts sank. Everyone felt the shift, the sting, the quiet humiliation Victoria pretended not to notice. But the man she ignored, Malcolm Reed, did notice. His expression didn't crack. No anger. No embarrassment. Just a slow blink like he'd seen this before, more times than he could count. The meeting that followed wasn't a meeting. It was a performance. Victoria cut Malcolm off every time he spoke. Dismissed his assessments. Only addressed the white members of the room. And after 20 quiet minutes, Malcolm simply closed his folder, stood up, and said he would reconsider whether Hailtech aligned with his values. Victoria smirked, believing she'd kept her world perfectly under control. But as Malcolm walked out of that glass building, one thing became clear. What she didn't know would change everything. By tomorrow morning, the woman who refused to shake his hand would be begging for a meeting she no longer deserved. Victoria Hale's office sat on the top floor like a throne room lifted above the rest of the world. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble desk, awards lined up in perfect symmetry. But behind all the shine was a truth she never admitted to anyone, not even herself. Hailtech wasn't what it used to be. Competition was rising fast. Their flagship software was outdated. Their last product launch barely survived the reviews. And the board, the same people who once worshipped her father, now whispered behind closed doors about whether Victoria had the vision to keep the empire alive. Still, she held on to her power with iron fingers, refusing to let anyone see a crack. In her mind, weakness was the beginning of failure. And failure, especially for someone with her last name, was unforgivable. As Victoria reviewed financial reports that morning, she clicked her pen with growing irritation. "Why do we even need outside investors?" she muttered under her breath. Her assistant, Emily, stood quietly nearby, choosing her words carefully. "The board believes bringing in new capital will help stabilize." "I don't need a lecture," Victoria snapped. Emily lowered her gaze. She was used to it. Everyone was. Working under Victoria meant learning how to disappear around her moods. Meanwhile, miles across town, the man she dismissed so easily was finishing his morning routine with a very different energy. Malcolm Reed sat in a small, cozy home office filled with books, sketches, community awards, and photos of young entrepreneurs he had mentored. A man grounded in purpose, not ego. He wasn't flashy, despite having more wealth and influence than most people guessed. Malcolm believed money only mattered when it opened doors for people who had never been allowed to knock. Growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities came rarely and left quickly, Malcolm learned two things young. The world will underestimate you, and you can't let that stop you from building what they can't imagine. He had seen doors close in his face for reasons no one said out loud. He had heard polite declines coded in quiet prejudice. He had learned to let insults roll off his back, even when they hurt. But he didn't let bitterness shape him. Instead, he built success strong enough to change other people's futures. When the email about Hailtech arrived, Malcolm hesitated. He had never been interested in saving giant companies run by people who saw themselves as royalty. But a mentor from his youth, an older black engineer named Mr. Carter, had once told him, "Someday you'll have the chance to walk through doors I never got near. If that day comes, walk in for both of us." Years ago, Mr. Carter applied for a job at Hailtech. They turned him down without explanation. He always suspected why. He never said the word racism. He didn't need to. Malcolm remembered that disappointment in his mentor's eyes. Maybe this meeting was a chance to honor him. So he accepted the invitation. Back in Hailtech headquarters, Victoria skimmed through Malcolm's portfolio. She didn't bother reading past the first page. The moment she saw a resume without Ivy League universities, without elite corporate logos, without the right kind of connections, she made her decision instantly. "Another ambitious dreamer," she muttered. "Let's hope he doesn't waste my time." Her bias wasn't loud, it wasn't a slur, it wasn't open hostility. It was quiet, polished, civil. The type of prejudice that hides behind professionalism, yet cuts just as deeply. Downstairs, employees moved nervously through the halls. The younger workers, especially employees of color, already knew what type of leader Victoria was. They had seen the microaggressions, the dismissive comments, the subtle exclusions in meetings. They hoped today's investor would be different. Someone who might bring fresh energy. Someone who might see value in the diverse talent Victoria constantly overlooked. By noon, the tension in the building was palpable. The upcoming meeting felt like a test, not just of Hailtech's financial future, but of the culture inside those walls. Victoria straightened her blazer, examined her reflection, and practiced the expression she used to intimidate without raising her voice. Cold, perfect, superior. To her, every interaction was a power game. Either she won or someone else did, and Victoria refused to lose to anyone, especially someone she didn't believe belonged in her world. As she walked to the boardroom, her heels echoed loudly down the hallway. Employees stood a little straighter, speaking a little softer, not because they admired her, but because they feared the consequences of disappointing her. On the other side of the city, Malcolm closed the worn leather notebook that held his mentor's old notes. He touched the cover gently, a small ritual of grounding. Then he slipped the notebook into his bag. He wasn't going to Hailtech to be impressed. He wasn't going to beg for an opportunity. He was going to see if the company had the character his mentor once hoped it did. But neither Malcolm nor Victoria realized that their worlds were about to collide in a way that would expose everything Hailtech had been hiding, and everything Victoria had been avoiding within herself. As Malcolm stepped into the car that would take him across town, he felt no nerves. He had nothing to prove. He had built himself from the ground up. But the storm waiting for him inside Hailtech was unlike anything he expected, and the mistake Victoria was moments away from making would explode far beyond a simple handshake. The elevator doors opened to the 27th floor, and Malcolm stepped out into a hallway that looked less like a workplace and more like a museum exhibit of corporate perfection. The carpet was too clean, the walls too sterile, everything screamed one message: no one here is allowed to be human. Employees pretended not to stare as he walked by, but their curious glances revealed something else, something deeper. Hope, quiet, hidden hope. A young black intern, barely 20, watched Malcolm with a look that mixed surprise and admiration. He had never seen someone who looked like him walking confidently through this building in a tailored suit as an investor. It reminded Malcolm why he took meetings like these. Not for the CEO, not for the money, but for moments like this, where his presence alone cracked the narrative of who belonged in rooms of power. A senior engineer, an older woman with graying hair, gave Malcolm a respectful nod. He nodded back, small exchange, big meaning. Then the boardroom door came into view. Inside, Victoria Hale stood at the head of a long glass table, surrounded by board members who spoke softly in her presence and loudly behind her back. She kept her back straight, chin lifted, expression polished to an almost unnatural calmness. She had built a fortress of confidence so high she could no longer see past its walls. The door opened. Every conversation stopped. Malcolm stepped in, carrying only his leather notebook and an unshakable calm. Board Member 1, a soft-spoken older man, smiled widely and rushed forward. "Mr. Reed, welcome. We're honored you made the time to join us today." Malcolm shook his hand warmly. Board Member 2, a woman with sharp eyes and strict posture, also greeted him. "We've heard incredible things about your ventures, truly incredible." Malcolm thanked her, appreciating the sincerity in her voice. Victoria finally turned her head. Her gaze scanned him with the precision of someone evaluating a product, not a person. He extended his hand, not too eager, not too slow, just respectful, professional, normal. The room held its breath. Victoria's eyes flicked to his hand, then up to his face, then away. She didn't lift her own hand. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Instead, she turned her shoulder slightly, a deliberate, trained gesture of dismissal. A silent statement. "You are not worth acknowledging." Board Member 1's smile faltered. Board Member 2's eyes widened. A young analyst swallowed hard, glancing at the floor. Malcolm didn't flinch. Years of experience steadied him. Moments like this used to burn. Now they just revealed truth. Victoria walked to her seat, leaving Malcolm standing beside his empty chair. "Let's begin," she said, without a glance in his direction. Malcolm sat down smoothly, but he noticed everything: the tension, the embarrassment on a few faces, the silent discomfort that filled the space like smoke. Victoria launched into her presentation, clicking through slides that highlighted HaleTech's legacy of excellence. She spoke quickly, almost defensively, as if trying to outrun the facts. Malcolm listened. He analyzed. He observed. Not just the numbers, the culture. The energy. The fear in the room. When Victoria finished, she gestured toward him with the smallest, coldest motion. "You've reviewed our proposal, thoughts?" "Not Mr. Reed. Not Malcolm. Just thoughts." He leaned forward calmly. "I've reviewed everything, and before I give my analysis, may I ask a question?" Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Do you believe HaleTech is adapting fast enough to the market's technological shifts?" Her tone sharpened instantly. "HaleTech doesn't adapt," she said. "HaleTech sets the direction for everyone else." Malcolm nodded thoughtfully. "And yet your last 2 launches underperformed." A ripple went through the room. Victoria's jaw tightened. "That had nothing to do with leadership," she said. "It was market inconsistency." Malcolm flipped a page in his notebook. "The reviews said your software lacked innovation, that the features were outdated, that competitors moved faster." Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Victoria crossed her arms. "And you think you understand our company better than we do?" "I don't presume that," Malcolm replied calmly, "but I do understand what innovation requires." His tone wasn't arrogant. It was steady, grounded, factual. Victoria's patience thinned. Her pride began to coil like a spring. "You come into our building," she said slowly, "sit at our table and question our vision." "I'm questioning the data," Malcolm interrupted gently. Gasps filled the room. No one had ever interrupted Victoria Hale. Not in years. Maybe ever. But Malcolm didn't do it to challenge her authority. He did it because he refused to shrink himself to make someone else comfortable. Victoria leaned back, her expression sharpening. "You know, Mr. Reed," she finally said, "I find it interesting that investors with more conventional resumes predicted none of these issues." Malcolm paused. There it was. Everyone heard what she didn't say. Everyone felt the sting in her tone. He looked her directly in the eyes. Calm, steady, unbothered. Maybe that's because they don't understand the communities your products fail to reach. A few heads turned toward him with curiosity. He continued, "You build for the top 5%, but the future market, the real growth, sits in communities you ignore." Diverse consumers, diverse creators, the people your company doesn't even see. Victoria smirked. A sharp, dismissive smirk. HaleTech isn't a charity, she said. We don't need to cater to every group to succeed. Board Member 2's face dropped. She knew exactly what that implied. Malcolm closed his notebook slowly. He had seen enough. I appreciate your time, he said quietly, but with a power that silenced the entire room. I'll take some time to reconsider whether our values align. Victoria tilted her head slightly, hiding a victorious smile. She thought she had won. She thought he was walking away because she intimidated him. She thought his withdrawal meant he needed HaleTech more than HaleTech needed him. She had no idea who she was dealing with. As Malcolm rose, several board members exchanged uneasy glances. Even the young black intern watching from the hallway felt something shift, something important. Malcolm walked toward the door. Halfway there he paused. Not to turn back. Not to confront. Not to argue. But because he sensed two things at once. HaleTech was crumbling from the inside, and Victoria Hale was too blinded by arrogance to see it. He stepped into the hallway and left the building without a single backward glance. Behind him, the boardroom sat frozen. Victoria exhaled sharply. Good, she said. We don't need him. But every person at that table, except her, knew the truth. They needed him more than they could admit. And by tomorrow morning, the consequences of her arrogance would hit her company like a tidal wave. The elevator doors closed behind Malcolm with a silent sigh, and suddenly the entire floor felt heavier, as if the air itself understood someone important had just been pushed out. Down the hall, Victoria's assistant, Lee, watched him leave from behind her computer screen. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, unmoving, her eyes following the retreating figure. She didn't know much about investors, but she knew this. Asterisk men like Malcolm Reed didn't walk away for small reasons. And they definitely didn't walk away quietly. Inside the boardroom, the tension had not settled. It had simply shape-shifted. Victoria stood at the head of the table, pretending to review her presentation, but no one missed the way her jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. What exactly was that? Asked Harold Underwood, the oldest board member, leaning forward carefully, as if trying not to ignite her temper. Victoria didn't even look up. What was what? Oh, don't play dumb, another board member whispered. You dismissed him. Victoria's head snapped up. I dismissed him because he brought nothing to the table. His pitch was vague, his projections too ambitious, and you didn't let him finish a single sentence, Harold interrupted. A few members exchanged glances, others looked away. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to be the one to say it aloud. Victoria flipped through her notes with exaggerated boredom. I treat people equally. If he felt uncomfortable, that's on him. But Harold wasn't backing off. I've been on this board for 22 years. I know when someone walks away because of an ego clash, and when they walk away because they were disrespected. Victoria's eyes hardened. This company doesn't run on feelings, Harold. It runs on performance. And investors, he countered softly, does it run on them too? She ignored him, but her silence only made the truth louder. Meanwhile, in the elevator asterisk, Malcolm stood still, hands gently folded in front of him, watching the numbers descend past 27-18-10. His face remained calm, but inside another story was unfolding, one only he could feel. There was no shame, no regret, no second-guessing, just a quiet disappointment, and a deep understanding that HaleTech had exposed something powerful without realizing it. They didn't know who they'd just dismissed, and they didn't know who he represented. When the elevator opened at the lobby, the receptionist straightened, her practiced smile softening into something real. Leaving so soon, Mr. Reed? He nodded gently. It seems today wasn't a fit. She hesitated. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for whatever happened up there. Malcolm paused, then offered her a warm smile. You didn't do anything wrong. He stepped outside, letting the glass doors close behind him. The moment he disappeared into the sunlight, the receptionist exhaled deeply, as if she'd been holding her breath for him. Back upstairs, the fallout had already begun. HaleTech's chief analytics officer, Daniel Brooks, pulled up his tablet and tapped through a series of data charts. Suddenly, his eyes widened, sharply, noticeably. "Victoria, I think you might want to take a look at this." She didn't turn. "If this is about that investor again." "It is, and you really, need to see this." The urgency in his voice sliced through her arrogance. She snatched the tablet. At first, she saw nothing alarming, just a profile, a portfolio summary, a list of companies. Then her eyes caught one line. And froze. Reed Capital, $4.7 billion assets under management. Daniel continued carefully, watching her expression. "He isn't just an investor, Victoria. He's the asterisk investor. Reed Capital funded ArcNet, Vortex Robotics, Helio Tech, Shepherd AI companies that went from startups to industry leaders in less than 4 years." But Victoria still didn't react. So Daniel added the part that mattered most. "And these companies, they just happen to be HaleTech's strongest competitors." Victoria's hand tightened around the tablet. Daniel continued, "If Reed Capital partners with even one more competitor, it could corner the market. HaleTech would be pushed into third place within months." Silence crashed over the room. Not quiet. Heavy. Crushing. Victoria slowly lowered the tablet. "No, he would have mentioned that." Harold shook his head. "He tried to repeatedly. You cut him off." A younger board member, Olivia, whispered, "You never even let him speak long enough to explain what he wanted from us." Victoria felt something unfamiliar creeping into her chest. Not guilt, not regret, but a tiny grain of fear. She pushed it down quickly. "This is nothing," she insisted. "He's just one man." Daniel spoke softly. "He's one man who influences thousands." The first warning signs hit the market asterisk. 30 minutes later, as Victoria stood in her office trying to convince herself she still had control, stock alerts lit up her phone. The first drop was small, barely noticeable. The second drop made her freeze. The third drop made her heart beat faster. She tapped the screen. HaleTech HTC, minus 1.2%. HaleTech HTC, minus 2.6%. HaleTech HTC, minus 4.1%. Her throat went dry. These weren't ordinary fluctuations. These were signs of uncertainty. And uncertainty spreads fast. She grabbed her phone and dialed her CFO. "Why is our stock dropping?" "We're not sure yet," he replied, voice tense. "But rumors are spreading that Reed Capital walked out of today's meeting. Investors think he rejected us." Victoria's eyes flashed. "He didn't reject us, I dismissed him." There was a long pause on the other end. "Victoria, that's worse." She slammed the phone down. But then, a notification buzzed. Her assistant, Lee, had forwarded something urgent. A single post, from an account with millions of followers. "Met with a company today that reminded me why representation still matters. Some doors aren't worth walking through. Some partnerships aren't worth accepting. Malcolm Reed. No names. No accusations. No details. But everyone knew. Everyone. And within minutes, the post went viral. Comments flooded in. Stock dipped further. News outlets began hinting at discrimination concerns within a major tech firm. Victoria sank into her chair, feeling the world tilt under her feet like a ship taking on water. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control. And what she didn't know yet was this. Malcolm hadn't even made his next move. Not yet. The real impact, the one that would bring HaleTech to its knees, was still on its way. The storm didn't start with thunder, it started with whispers. Inside HaleTech, employees gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes flickering nervously toward the glass office where Victoria Hale paced like a trapped animal. Every few seconds she checked her phone, hoping the stock alerts would stop. but each new vibration felt like another crack in the walls she'd built around her perfect world. Her assistant Lee stepped inside cautiously. "Victoria, the media is calling, all of them." Victoria didn't look up. "Tell them no comment. They're asking about discrimination allegations." "There are no allegations," Victoria snapped. "There's one vague social post from an overly sensitive investor." Lee swallowed the urge to correct her. She simply nodded and stepped out, closing the door quietly behind her. Meanwhile, downstairs in the lobby, the receptionist who had watched Malcolm walk out that morning replayed the moment again and again. The quiet disappointment on his face. The way he held himself with dignity, even in the face of disrespect. She could feel in her bones that something bigger than a business deal had just broken open. By noon, the first major blog published an article titled, "Anonymous Investor Rejects Major Tech Firm Over Lack of Respect." The article didn't name Hailtech, but the internet didn't need names. It needed clues, and there were plenty. Someone leaked a photo from the boardroom. Someone else leaked that the meeting ended early. Rumors sparked, spun, and ignited like dry leaves in summer heat. Across the city, within the clean, calm walls of Reed Capital, Malcolm sat in his office, reviewing market reports, not about Hailtech, but about the companies he supported. His desk was simple, his office uncluttered, a single framed quote on the wall behind him. "Value isn't just numbers, value is how you treat people." His phone buzzed. It was his partner, Samira. "Have you seen everything trending right now?" Malcolm exhaled slowly. "I've seen it. People think you're calling Hailtech out directly." "I didn't mention them." "You didn't have to. The story is writing itself." He leaned back in his chair. "I didn't want this to turn into a spectacle. That's not who I am." "I know, but sometimes the truth comes out even when you don't shout it." He closed his eyes for a moment. He hadn't gone into that meeting wanting conflict. He had walked in with genuine hope, hope for partnership, innovation, progress. But instead, he'd been met with the same arrogance he'd seen too many times from people who measured worth by their own narrow lens. He wasn't angry. He was simply done. Back at Hailtech, the situation worsened. The board held an emergency meeting without Victoria's approval. She stormed in, her face flushed red. "What is going on?" she demanded. Harold looked at her with the tired patience of a man who had watched too many leaders destroy themselves. "What's going on," he said evenly, "is that we are losing millions by the hour." "It's temporary," she insisted. "It's not," Daniel said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Our biggest shareholders are reconsidering their positions. They're afraid Reed Capital will make a public statement next." Victoria froze. "He won't," she said confidently. "He's too polished, too careful. He wouldn't risk looking unprofessional." Harold's voice was gentle but firm. Professionalism and silence are not the same. Sometimes silence is power. For the first time that day, Victoria felt something cold crawl up her spine. She marched out of the room and headed straight to her private office, slamming the door so hard the walls shuddered. She grabbed her phone and called her PR director. "We need a statement," she said sharply. "About what?" "About equality, about diversity, about whatever people expect to hear." There was a long pause. Then the PR director said quietly, "Victoria, no statement will work unless you address what actually happened." "I didn't do anything wrong." "Then why is the world saying you did?" She hung up. Hours passed, share prices fell further, employees avoided eye contact, whispers grew louder, investors asked for urgent updates. Victoria finally sat down at her desk, alone, staring at the city skyline glowing outside her floor-to-ceiling windows. For the first time in years, she felt small. She picked up Malcolm's folder, the one she had refused to look at during the meeting. She flipped it open and scanned the first page. Her eyes widened. His proposal wasn't vague. It was detailed, visionary, and years ahead of anything Hailtech had even begun to explore. The second page hit harder. Projections, models, partnerships, evidence of his experience and success. The third page devastated her. A list of companies he had built, funded, or guided, all outperforming Hailtech. Her hand began to tremble. She had dismissed a man whose foresight could have taken her company into the future. She had ignored the one person who understood the market better than her entire board combined. She had underestimated someone because, deep down, she believed no outsider, not one who looked like him, could ever know more than her. She wanted to slam the folder shut. She wanted to pretend none of this was happening. But she couldn't unsee the truth. Just then, a notification popped up on her screen. A major news network was running a live segment. Is HaleTech at the center of a professional bias scandal? Victoria's stomach twisted. They didn't say her name. But they didn't need to. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. She opened it. A single line flashed on her screen. Respect is the foundation of partnership. You taught me everything I needed to know today. Zemar. Her breath caught. He wasn't threatening her. He wasn't angry. He was simply stating the truth. And that terrified her more than any accusation could. Down in the lobby, employees watched the news on the big screens, whispering about what tomorrow might bring. Some were scared. Some were angry. Some felt justice was finally chasing someone who had escaped it too long. As night fell, the building that once felt like an empire now felt like a sinking ship. And the one person who could steady it was the same man she had refused to shake hands with. But even then, he wasn't done. Not yet. The real shift, the one that would expose everything she had tried to hide, was coming. And it wasn't going to wait for her to be ready. The next morning began with a silence so heavy it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. HaleTech's lobby, usually buzzing with energy, seemed frozen. Employees walked quickly, avoiding small talk, clutching their phones like lifelines as they read the latest headlines. Victoria stepped out of her car wearing the same hardened expression she always wore, but today that mask didn't convince anyone, not even herself. Her reflection in the glass door showed the truth she couldn't deny: exhaustion, fear, and something she refused to name, regret. Inside, the receptionist greeted her with forced politeness. Her eyes flicked upward only once, searching Victoria's face for any hint of humility. She found none, so she quietly looked away. Upstairs, the boardroom was already filled. No one rose to greet her. No one smiled. She felt the shift immediately, like the air had changed density. She had walked into countless meetings before, always certain she was the most powerful person in the room, but today that certainty cracked. Harold slid a folder toward her. "We received this early this morning," he said quietly. Inside the folder was a notice from one of their largest partners. They were pausing all future collaboration until HaleTech resolved its internal culture concerns. Culture concerns. A phrase that looked polite but burned like acid. Victoria shut the folder, forcing calm into her voice. "This is a misunderstanding. I will fix it." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "With respect, Victoria, you don't know how big this is." "I said I will fix it." "That's the problem," Harold replied. "You think you can fix everything alone. You don't listen. You dismiss people, smart people, simply because they don't look or sound like what you expect." Her jaw clenched. She wanted to argue, but the truth hit too close. She didn't respond. She simply gathered the folder and left the room without a word, her heels echoing sharply down the hallway. Back at Reed Capital, Malcolm sat at a long table with community leaders and entrepreneurs. Black founders, female founders, innovators who had fought for every inch of space they stood on. They were discussing a new initiative to support underserved tech students. Samira approached Malcolm with her tablet in hand. "You should see this." He glanced up. More headlines. "Not just that." She handed him the tablet. A poll showing public perception of HaleTech had plummeted. Influencers, tech analysts, and former employees were sharing stories, some subtle, some direct, about microaggressions, ignored contributions, unequal opportunities. "Is this what you wanted?" Samira asked softly. "No," Malcolm said. "I don't want anyone dragged through the mud. I want accountability and respect." "You gave them a chance." "Yes," he murmured, "and I'm giving them another one by staying silent." Outside his office, the city hummed with energy, but inside he felt a weight settle. He didn't take pleasure in anyone's downfall, especially not when the consequences fell hardest on the employees who had already been marginalized. He picked up his pen, tapping it thoughtfully against the table. In her office across town, Victoria stared at her reflection again. The previous day played in her mind like a loop she couldn't escape. The handshake she refused. The blank folder she pretended wasn't important. The look in Malcolm's eyes when he realized exactly who she was beneath the polished title. She opened his proposal again, this time reading every word slowly. With each page, a knot formed in her stomach. The man she dismissed could have been the key to saving her company. His innovation was bold, human-centered, transformative. The kind of thinking Hailtech desperately needed but hadn't seen in years. She whispered to herself, "How could I have been so blind?" There was a knock at her door. She straightened. "Come in." Lee entered hesitantly. "I think you should see this." She set a stack of printed comments on the desk. Anonymous employee reviews, statements from former staff, social media threads. None of them mentioned her name directly, but every sentence pointed unmistakably toward her leadership style. Cold, dismissive, unapproachable, biased without realizing it, biased and realizing it, biased and not caring. Victoria read the comments slowly, each one slicing deeper than she expected. She had always believed she was simply strong, demanding, efficient. She had never considered that strength without empathy was just control. That efficiency without humanity was cruelty. She sank into her chair, the weight of her own actions settling around her. Meanwhile, Malcolm walked through a community tech hub where young coders typed with bright eyes and restless ambition. They greeted him with excitement, gratitude, admiration. He saw himself in them, the hungry brilliance that often went unnoticed by those who assumed genius came only from certain places, certain schools, certain faces. A young woman approached him shyly. "Is it true that you walked out of Hailtech because they didn't treat you right?" Malcolm smiled gently. "I walked out because respect is non-negotiable, not for me, not for you, not for anyone." Her eyes lit up. In that moment, Malcolm reminded himself why he refused to let arrogance or ignorance define his path. Because every time he stood up for himself, he was teaching someone else to do the same. Back at Hailtech, the pressure finally broke through Victoria's armor. She closed her office blinds, sat down at her desk, and let herself feel something she hadn't allowed in years. Fear, shame, and for the first time, clarity. She realized she had become the very type of leader she once despised as a young woman trying to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. She had adopted their coldness, their ego, their condescension, believing it was the only way to survive. But in doing so, she had lost pieces of herself. Pieces she wasn't sure she could get back. She looked again at the message Malcolm had sent. One line, simple, honest, unthreatening. Respect is the foundation of partnership. She read it again and again. Then she whispered to the empty room, "I need to meet with him." No one heard her. But the decision changed everything. She picked up her phone with trembling hands and called her driver. "I need to go to Reed Capital," she said quietly. Her voice had no arrogance left, no entitlement. Just truth. The drive across the city felt longer than any distance she had traveled, even though it was only a few miles. Each block felt like a mirror reflecting the parts of herself she didn't want to see. For the first time in her career, she was walking toward someone not to impress them, but to apologize. The question was, would he open the door? And even if he did, what would she say? The moment she stepped into the lobby of Reed Capital, every eye turned toward her. Not with fear, not with awe, but with curiosity. Because everyone could feel it. The woman who walked in that building was not the same woman who had walked out on Malcolm the day before. Something had cracked. Something had shifted. Something had begun. And the turning point, the one that would define everything, waited on the other side of his office door. Victoria stood outside Malcolm Reed's office door, palms damp, heartbeat unsteady, her breath shallow like she'd climbed a mountain instead of riding an elevator. She had faced hostile takeovers, courtroom battles, billion-dollar negotiations, yet nothing felt as terrifying as the uncertainty behind that wooden door. For the first time in years, she felt small. She raised her hand and knocked. There was a pause. Then a calm voice from inside said, "Come in." She opened the door carefully, almost timidly. Malcolm sat at his desk, reviewing documents with the same quiet focus that had unsettled her the day before. He looked up, his expression neutral. Not angry, not cold, just observant. Victoria stepped inside and closed the door behind her. He didn't stand. He didn't force a smile. He simply waited. "Mr. Reed," she began. "Ms. Hale." His tone wasn't sharp. It wasn't soft either. It was balanced, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who understood his value and didn't need to argue it. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything left unsaid. "I know I came without an appointment," she said. "You did." She took a step forward. "I'm here because I want to discuss." "Discuss," he repeated quietly, "or repair." Her breath caught at the accuracy of that single word. "I want to repair what I broke," she admitted. Malcolm leaned back slightly, studying her. "What exactly do you believe you broke?" Victoria hesitated. Her instinct was to defend herself, but the room felt too honest for old habits. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I disrespected you," she said. "I dismissed you before hearing you, before knowing you, before giving you the basic courtesy of acknowledgement." She paused, and the world saw it. Malcolm didn't react. His face remained calm, unreadable, almost gentle. "And now your company is under pressure," he said. "Yes." "And now your board is turning on you." "Yes." "And now you're here." She swallowed, "Yes." He nodded slowly, as if fitting the pieces together. Then he folded his hands on the desk. "Tell me something," he said calmly. "Why didn't you shake my hand?" Victoria froze. Of all the questions he could have asked, that was the one she feared most. Her throat tightened. "I wish I had an answer that made me look better than the truth." "And what is the truth?" She closed her eyes, steadying herself. When she spoke, her voice was not the voice of the unshakable CEO. It was the voice of a human being confronting her own reflection. "The truth is, I was arrogant. I saw you and I judged you without thinking. I measured you by the wrong things, things that shouldn't matter. I thought I was protecting my company from risk, but really, I was protecting my ego." She opened her eyes. "And I was wrong." Malcolm didn't interrupt her, didn't offer comfort, didn't try to soften the moment. He simply listened, something she hadn't done for him. Victoria continued, her voice more fragile now. "I've been reading your proposal, your achievements, your work in communities, your investments. I should have recognized your brilliance from the moment you walked into that room, but I was blinded by who I thought mattered." She took a breath. "I am deeply ashamed of my behavior." Malcolm leaned forward slightly. "And if I wasn't a person with public influence, if the world hadn't paid attention to what you did, would you be here today?" The question hit her harder than any headline. "I want to believe I would," she said honestly, "but if I'm being truthful, I don't know." The honesty surprised even her. Malcolm nodded slowly. "That's the most honest thing you've said." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Malcolm stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. His posture wasn't tense but thoughtful, like a man deciding whether the person behind him deserved forgiveness or a lesson. "You know," he said quietly, "when I left that meeting yesterday, I wasn't angry. I've been dismissed before. I've had my intelligence questioned. I've been underestimated more times than I can count." He turned toward her. "But the difference is, I no longer let other people decide my worth." Victoria lowered her eyes. "You made a mistake," Malcolm continued. "A serious one, but I'm not interested in destroying you. I don't want your company to collapse. I don't want your employees to suffer. And I don't want your name dragged through the mud." She looked up sharply. "Then why didn't you stop the rumors?" "I never confirmed them," he said simply. "People drew their own conclusions." "You could have shut it down." "I could have," he agreed. "But if a single moment is enough to shake a company to its core, then maybe the moment wasn't the problem. Maybe the structure was already weak." Victoria breathed in slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. He stepped closer to her, not intimidating, not confrontational, just honest. "What you did in that room wasn't just about me," he said. "It was about every person who has ever been dismissed because someone in power thought their presence wasn't worth acknowledging." Each word struck like a reflection in a mirror she'd avoided for years. Victoria's voice cracked. I know that now. Malcolm studied her face carefully. So the question is, what are you going to do about it? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and took out a folder, the same one containing his proposal. She placed it on his desk. I don't want a deal because the public is watching, she said. I want a partnership because your vision is better than mine, because you see people as part of the future, not obstacles to it, because you are the kind of leader I should have been. She paused, gathering courage. I am asking for a chance to earn your respect, to rebuild trust, and to build Hailtech into something that reflects the values I failed to show. Malcolm looked at the folder, then at her. He didn't reach for it. Respect is earned, he said softly, not requested. I know. Why should I believe you've changed? Victoria felt the answer rise from a place deeper than strategy. Because for the first time in my life, she whispered, I'm not fighting to be right, I'm fighting to be better. Malcolm held her stare for a long moment. Then he walked around his desk and stood in front of her. He extended his hand. A simple gesture. A gesture she refused him once. Her breath caught as she looked at it, not as a symbol of a deal, but as a chance at redemption. She placed her hand in his. For the first time in 2 days, her shoulders loosened. His handshake was steady, firm, warm, everything she had denied him. This isn't forgiveness, Malcolm said quietly. This is the start of accountability. I accept that. And this isn't a guarantee of partnership. I understand. But it is a beginning. She nodded, unable to speak. He released her hand. She felt like she had just crossed a bridge she didn't deserve, yet desperately needed. And Victoria, he added gently, don't try to hide from what happened. Own it, publicly, honestly. It's the only way forward. Her eyes softened with something closer to humility than anything she'd shown in years. I will, she said, not because I have to, but because it's the truth. Malcolm nodded once. The room felt lighter but not finished. Healing had begun, but consequences remained. And as Victoria walked out of his office, she didn't feel like a defeated CEO. She felt like a human being finally waking up. The world outside still buzzed with rumors and accusations, but something had changed. Not in the headlines, not in the markets, in her. And that change would shape everything that came next. When the dust finally began to settle in that conference room, it felt like everyone was breathing for the first time. The woman at the heart of this entire storm, the black employee who had been silenced, ignored, and pushed into the shadows, stood tall in the center, surrounded not by hostility now, but by eyes that finally saw asterisk her. Not as a problem, not as someone overreacting, but as a human being who had survived something she never should have experienced in the first place. Her father walked in slowly, still shaken from everything that had unfolded. His eyes glistened when he saw her. His daughter, the same little girl he used to walk to school with, the one he told over and over again, never let anyone dim your light. Seeing her surrounded by people who finally understood the truth felt like watching justice take its first breath. Her supervisor, the man who had tried so hard to bury her voice under fake professionalism and quiet cruelty, couldn't look up. Every accusation, every lie, every tactic he had used to maintain control had collapsed under the weight of what she revealed. His power wasn't just gone. It had evaporated so completely that he seemed smaller, like someone who had just realized his world was never as wide as he thought. The room stayed silent until the investigator finally spoke. Her voice was steady, formal, but thick with something deeper, regret. Your courage today didn't just expose misconduct, she said. It exposed a system, a problem far bigger than one man, and because of you, we're going to fix it. Those words struck something inside the daughter. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Her father stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. You didn't just stand up for yourself, he whispered. You stood up for everybody who couldn't. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not because she was weak, but because she had been strong for too long. The supervisor was escorted out of the building. No shouting, no arguments, just a heavy, painful silence. The kind of silence that comes when someone finally faces the consequences they thought would never reach them. As he disappeared down the hallway, The daughter exhaled a breath she'd been holding for months. But the story didn't end there. Later that week, the company held a mandatory town hall meeting. Hundreds of employees filled the space, whispering rumors, theories, fear. No one expected what came next. The daughter was invited to speak. She stepped onto the stage with slow, steady steps, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes. For a moment, her heart raced the way it used to, full of doubt, fear, hesitation. But then she remembered everything she had survived. Every moment she chose truth over silence. Every time she stood tall even when she felt invisible. She lifted the microphone. "When you ignore a voice," she said softly, "you don't silence it, you just teach it to grow louder." The room froze. I wasn't just dismissed, I wasn't just disrespected, I was erased, and when I spoke up, the people responsible tried to bury me deeper. Her voice shook, not from weakness, but because she was speaking from a wound that was finally allowed to heal. "But I'm still here," she continued. "And I'm not alone, because there are people in this building who have experienced the same thing, people who stayed quiet because they thought speaking up wouldn't matter." She paused, letting her words sink deep. But today, everything changes, because silence is how injustice grows, and speaking up is how we end it. Someone in the audience stood up, then another, and another. Soon half the room was standing, applauding, not out of politeness, not because they were told to, but because they were witnessing something bigger than a corporate complaint. They were witnessing the beginning of a new culture. After the meeting, coworkers approached her, people she barely knew, sharing pieces of their own stories, their own scars, their own moments of being ignored. Some thanked her for being brave. Others apologized for not noticing sooner. In those moments, the workplace that once felt suffocating began to feel like a place where things might actually change. But the most emotional moment came later that evening. When she reached home, she found her father waiting on the porch. He didn't say anything at first. He simply opened his arms. She walked straight into them, letting herself finally collapse into the one place she knew was safe. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "Not because of the outcome, but because you chose courage in the dark when no one was watching." She cried quietly, the kind of tears that wash away what you've been carrying for too long. He held her tighter. "You didn't just fight a man," he said. "You fought a system, and you won." For the first time in months, she believed him. The resolution didn't erase the pain of what she endured. Healing isn't clean, justice isn't instant, and rebuilding confidence after being broken down takes time. But she no longer felt alone, no longer felt unseen. The people who mattered finally knew the truth, and more importantly, she finally knew her own strength. She returned to work not as the same woman who once tried to shrink herself to avoid conflict, but as someone who understood the power of her voice. Her colleagues treated her with new respect, not out of fear, but because they recognized what she had survived. Policies changed. Training programs were updated. A new reporting system was introduced, one that actually protected employees instead of protecting abusers. Her story became the catalyst. A quiet revolution had begun. And one afternoon, as she closed her laptop and prepared to leave the office, she heard laughter in the hallway. A group of interns, young, hopeful, new to the world, were talking excitedly about the company's new era. One of them said, "It finally feels safe to speak up here." She smiled softly. That was the real victory. Not punishment, not revenge. Change. She stepped outside, feeling the sun on her skin, feeling lighter than she had in months. Her father called her phone just to check in, something he did now daily, not out of worry, but out of pride. "How's my warrior?" he joked. She laughed. "Healing," she replied. And for the first time, the word felt true. Her journey hadn't just restored justice. It had rebuilt her sense of self. She discovered courage she didn't know she had, strength she didn't think she deserved, and a voice that could no longer be silenced. Some stories end with punishment. Hers ended with transformation. And the world she walked back into, the world she changed with her truth, would never be the same again. What this story truly teaches is that dignity and integrity can never be bought or ignored. A single moment of disrespect, refusing to shake someone's hand, dismissing their worth, can ripple into consequences far beyond what anyone expects. It reminds us that prejudice and arrogance, no matter how subtle, have a cost. The black investor's calm confidence, his unwavering patience, and his quiet strength in the face of humiliation became the catalyst for change. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't retaliate with anger, yet his actions demanded recognition of his value. True power lies not in titles, wealth, or status, but in character, self-respect, and the courage to remain unshaken in injustice. For the white CEO, the lesson was brutal but necessary. The world does not bend to ignorance or bias. Humility, acknowledgement, and respect are earned through actions, not assumed through position. The CEO's desperation the next day revealed a truth often overlooked: respect cannot be forced. It must be given freely, and when denied, it returns with a lesson. This story also leaves us reflecting on our own actions. How many times do we underestimate others, judge them by appearance, or allow pride to blind us to real value? How often do we fail to see the quiet strength and wisdom in those around us? Every person has a story, a skill, and a dignity that demands recognition. If this story touched you, let it be more than entertainment. Let it be a reminder: respect everyone, stand firm in your worth, and never let arrogance cloud your judgment. Justice, dignity, and integrity have a way of coming full circle, often when you least expect it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and remember, one act of kindness, acknowledgement, or simple respect can change the course of a life. Don't wait for a mistake to teach the lesson. Choose respect today, and let every handshake, every meeting, every decision reflect the humanity we all share. The story ends with a simple truth. Real power is measured by how you treat others when no one is watching, and how quickly the world reminds you when you forget that lesson.